High-profile divorces like Rupert and Wendy Murdoch, Billy Ray and Tish Cyrus, and Deion and Pilar Sanders have been making headlines. Not only do these couples have to deal with the pain of divorce, they are also dealing with financial battles.
Well, here to discuss these high-profile couples and the murky waters of divorce is family and divorce attorney Lori Ann Douglas. Lori Ann, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I always love to discuss these matters.
Well, it's important. You know, I think a lot of people think they know what a prenup is and what it does, but just to clear it up, tell us what a prenup is and how it can protect people.
Well, first, I am here on behalf of the prenuptial agreement.
Okay.
It is a much maligned document because everyone thinks it's about divorce, and that it's not really what it is. What it is an agreement that sets forth the blueprint of your financial future as a couple. It requires full financial disclosure, and then it discusses what will happen in terms of separate property and marital property in the event of divorce or when one of the parties dies. But it is a fabulous document, and everyone who gets married should have a prenuptial agreement.
Well, what if you don't have any money? You're a young couple, he doesn't have anything, she doesn't have anything, or he and he don't have anything, and then they come together with nothing. Why do you need a prenup?
Because you're going to have something.
Really?
One day.
Right, you're going to have something one day.
Okay.
And when you're getting married, whether you have anything or not, you're in love. But when you're getting divorced, doesn't matter how many assets you have, you do not like each other. That is just the status of the situation at the time. So even if you don't have significant assets, you can discuss what would be the expectation in regards to future earnings, whether it's your degree, whether it's retirement plans. And by doing so, that helps to set forth how the parties are going to conduct themselves financially as a team.
Okay.
But you know, prenups can be a very sensitive conversation. If you're supposed to be getting married forever with someone, it's like, how do you bring up that conversation of just in case we get a divorce?
Well, first of all, prenuptial agreements are also fabulous for in the event of death, and everybody is going to die, you just don't know when.
That's true.
So in a prenuptial agreement, the parties can discuss and negotiate what would happen in the event of the premature death of one of the parties, because the second you say I do, the spouses automatically acquire rights in each other's estates. So the only way you can change that is by doing it per agreement. In addition, you know, divorce is a reality. 50% of all marriages, first marriages end in divorce, and it goes up higher. I'm twice divorced myself.
Really?
And so, yes.
Did you have a prenup both times?
I did not, but I represented myself, and neither of my husbands even got lawyers. They know better. So my divorces were pretty easy.
Well,
but
I see the bling in your earrings, so clearly you got some money.
Actually, I didn't. But it was important. It would have been beneficial, quite frankly, to both my ex-husbands to have had a prenuptial agreement, because then maybe they would have gotten something.
Okay.
I like her.
I mean, that's the reality. It's not just, that's the other thing. It's not just the moneyed spouse who should want a prenuptial agreement. It's the non-moneyed spouse. Because you could be going along happily married thinking everything is fine, and the moneyed spouse comes home and says, hey, I want a divorce. And now you haven't negotiated what will happen to you, the non-moneyed spouse, if you're suddenly out there in the street.
Well, let's talk about Rupert Murdoch and Wendy Dang.
Okay.
Rupert Murdoch's last divorce cost him $1.7 billion. It's safe to presume that he has an ironclad prenup right now for the third marriage, right?
I would assume so,
Okay.
but if he doesn't, that would have been his choice. He clearly knew going into the third marriage that there's a good likelihood, there's a great likelihood of divorce. So if he chose to get married without one, that was his choice, and she should have gotten one too.
Okay, so let's say that they have one. Does that entitle Wendy Dang to any part of his fortune, or does she walk away with nothing, even though she did mother two of his children?
Well, no, that's the thing that's significant about a prenuptial agreement. It has to be negotiated with full financial disclosure. both parties must have counsel. So the moneyed spouse definitely puts forth what he or she thinks is appropriate if there's a divorce, but the non-moneyed spouse comes in and says, hey, if there's a divorce, I'm entitled to X, Y, and Z.
Got you.
And the parties can negotiate those terms. And I'm sure Miss Wendy is not walking away with it.
Because he also has a big business. Can she actually take part of that business, or is that separate because it's business versus personal?
Well, that should have been negotiated.
Okay.
The parties, when you get married, the parties come to the marriage with separate property, but what is acquired during the marriage is typically considered marital property unless you negotiate differently. So the appreciation in his business, for example, she would be entitled to a piece of that.
Okay, well, what about guardianship? Can that be put into an actual prenup? Because, you know, Billy Ray Cyrus and his soon-to-be ex-wife, Tish, she filed for custody of their 3 children. So is that something that could have been put in a prenup beforehand?
Well, custody and child support is treated much differently than financial issues in terms of divorce, because when it comes to custody and child support, it's the best interest of the child. That is the standard. So even if the parties had negotiated, okay, if we get divorced, the wife will be the primary caretaker of the children. If at the time of the divorce, the wife's a drunk and dad needs to be the primary caretaker of the children, the court is not going to honor that prenuptial agreement. The court is going to consider the best interests of the child.
Well, what if you're already married? Can you still get a prenup, say, halfway through your union?
Well, yes, but it's not called a prenup. A prenup
because prenup is prenuptial, right?
So what do you call it? A mid-nup? It's called a post-nup because it's after the marriage. And while the parties can certainly enter into post-nuptial agreements in most states, they're recognized. All of these things are state-specific, and everyone would have to check in accordance with their state law. But while you can certainly negotiate for a postnuptial agreement, it's much harder to get someone to agree to give up rights they already have than to waive future rights.
Gotcha.
So if you're already married and they say, no, I'm not signing it, there's not much you can do.
What can you do?
But the other thing you can do is estate planning, because that's my other interest. And in doing estate planning, that's how both parties become aware of what are all the assets and what are the marital assets and what has been the growth. So I always suggest to people, hey, if you're not sure about the divorce just yet, but you want to know what you have, go see your estate planning attorney and do that estate planning, and you'll get that information.
Very smart.
So do you think there's a such thing as an ironclad prenup? Because even Chris Humphries, when he got divorced from Kim Kardashian, still tried to go after her money and say, well, the marriage wasn't real at all. So are there loopholes?
Right. Well, no, the prenup was probably ironclad. So what he tried to say is, we were never legally married and get the marriage annulled. If the marriage never took place, under his theory, was fraud. So he said, hey, this was not a marriage because she entered into it fraudulently, and therefore I want it annulled. The court obviously ruled against that because they did get a divorce ultimately, and I am sure that Kim's prenuptial agreement protected her. I would assume she was the moneyed spouse in that case.
Now, really quickly, what about, say, if you're Oprah Stedman? You're not married, but you've been together forever.
Right. Well, if you've been together forever, you should definitely go see your local lawyer in regards to cohabitation agreements and whether there's a common law marriage is recognized in your state. In some states, once you've been living together for 7 years, you do become common law, and the other person will acquire rights in your property and your estate. And in other states, it doesn't exist at all. So it's very important. But the parties can always go and negotiate an agreement. So we often do cohabitation agreements for people that just want to live together, have no intention of getting married, but want to be sure that if it blows up suddenly, you don't just end up in the street, because that's what actually happens. You just end up out of the house.
You keep talking about things being state-specific. Are there states that are more prenup-friendly than others? I hear New York is pretty prenup-friendly.
Yes, New York is a prenup-friendly state because New York is a wealthy state. So in a place where people come together with lots of assets, then it's a place where people really want to be able to negotiate what would happen. And New York, for example, This is a state where your real estate is usually worth a lot of money.
True.
And almost everybody who works for a company in corporate America, any place, they have retirement plans. And so that becomes a hotly contested item if there's a divorce. One person funds a 401k and one does not, but everybody wants the benefit on the divorce.
That's true.
So this is a state where you should really consider prenuptial agreements and
Very important
negotiate
information.
them.
And you're going to be giving so many more tips in a book you're currently writing about co-parenting after a messy divorce.
Yes.
So what is one tip from the book you can give us for those people who are getting married besides needing a prenup and those already in marriage?
Well, to be honest, in terms of co-parenting, my biggest piece of advice is remember, even though you think your spouse is a knucklehead, your children love their mother or father. And so you have to...
You said a knucklehead.
You have to remember to play nice for the benefit of the children. That's the most important thing.
Get your money, but play nice.
Get your money, but play nice.
Lorianne Douglas, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And note to you, get a prenup. You're watching Arise Entertainment 360.